Hey everyone, so last week in our how-to series we looked at the top 10 most common mistakes that people make with their tank. This week we're going to take a little bit more of a positive spin and look at the top 10 tips for making your tank look really great. We're going to have a little look at all the things that people who have very successful tanks most frequently do, and things that you might not be doing now but you would pick up as you went along in the hobby with experience. We're going to give you a little helping hand and shortcut so you can start doing those things straight away and you reap enormous benefits for not that much extra effort. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is keeping your sand bed clean. Now your sand is a key part of your filtration within your tank. Although people often think that the live rock does a large part of their filtration, actually it tends to be the sand bed that carries out the most of the biological activity within your aquarium. So it's very important that you keep your sand in tip-top condition at all times. Now if you've got a new sand bed, you can maintain it straight from the word go. It's very simple. So make sure that you rake through all the sand with your hand or a stick at least once a week. Preferably when you're doing your water change so you can get any dust or sediment out, or just before you change your floss out, so that way you can get as much detritus out of the sand into the floss and then pull the floss straight away. That's quite important to do. Secondly, ensure that you have enough animals to help turn the sand over to save them work for you. So you want one conch roughly per 100 litres or so of tank volume. For very small conches, only an inch or so, you might want a few more. If they're very big, 3-4 inches, you might want a few less. But for most mid-sized conches in the sort of 1 to 3 inch range, which is the most common ones you'll see, about 1 per 100 litres is about right. If your sand bed's more than 3 months old and is reasonably mature, you can also add sand sips and starfish. Again, about 1 per 4 square feet, something like that, tank size, will be enough to help keep the sand in tip-top shape. Also ensure you've got a lot of Nacerius snails in there, about 1 per 20 litres. They will also help keep the sand turned over a little bit. Barium wrasses are a good idea for pest control. They'll also help with your sand. And there are other sand sifting species for larger aquariums, such as sweet lips and goatfish, which will help as well. If your tank is 200 litres or plus, definitely get a chalk goby if you can. You can add 1 per about 200 litres-ish of tank volume, as long as they're all roughly the same size and they'll go in at the same time. They're by far the best sand sifting goby because they don't leave big mounds everywhere and things like that. Now if you've neglected your sand bed for quite a while and not disturbed it, you may have all sorts of toxic gases in there. So you need to be quite careful when you first turn the sand over. Only do a small area at a time, around a 3 inch by 3 inch square, and if you see bubbles coming out or notice a smell of methane or hydrogen sulfide, which will smell sort of like an eggy, unpleasant smell, immediately stop what you're doing and do a little 3 inch by 3 inch square with about a 5 or 10 minute gap between each one. It doesn't matter if you do it over several days or spread it over a week, but once you've raked it through that first time and got all that gas out of the sand bed, then you can keep turning it over. Your sand bed wants to be about 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep in a very fine sand, something with 0 to 1 mil range. We use the Carib Sea Live Bahama is our sand of choice. If you've got a coarser sand, you need a slightly deeper sand bed. So if you're using something like a 1 to 2 mil or 1 to 3 mil sand, then you want the sand bed around 2 inches. And never use the sands coarser than about 2 mil because it will trap a lot of food particles within it and cause you a lot of water quality issues. But most important of all, look after your sand bed. It's the key part of your filtration system. Make sure you maintain it every single week and make sure you've got as many animals to help you in that process as possible. Okay, so nice easy one. Pro tip number 2 is photo or video your tank at least once a month. So every month take a little photo or video, save them all in the same folder on your phone or on your computer. So each month you can have a look through and see the progress of your tank. If you save the file name as the date, then that way you can sort them easily and it's easier to find what date you saved them all as. You can flick through, you can see which corals are doing well, which corals are doing not so well and may need a little bit of extra care. You can see all the growth rates on the fish and things like that. It's a really helpful guide. When you see the tank every day, you don't need to notice small changes which accumulate over time. It enables you to keep an eye on pest problems such as bubble algae or invasive macroalgae, and keep an eye on any corals that are either not doing very well organs growing really well and starting to sting one another. Okay, so the third thing we're going to look at is stability. Now this is critically important, especially in a coral tank. It's less important with fish, but with corals it is absolutely critical. For many corals it's more important that the levels are stable than it is even that if they're correct. Obviously being correct helps, but instability is the worst thing you can have. So make sure that you monitor your temperature and salinity particularly, and they're kept very small margins of error on those. Temperature wants to vary no more than 0.5 degrees within the course of a day, and salinity doesn't want to wander more than 0.5 ppt ever, really. So most people run at temperatures, coral reefs are quite warm, so you want to typically run at a temperature of 26 to 28 degrees. If you keep it shallow water species, you might want to go slightly warmer than that if you haven't got any deep water stuff. And within a single day you don't want more than 0.5 degree swing within that day. Salinity, the natural seawater is at 35 ppt, which is about 1026 and a fraction depending on the temperature. Now it's generally better to be slightly under than it is to be slightly over, so most people run about 34 ppt. You want it to never swing more than half a point from that ever. So you never want to go below 33.5, never more than 34.5, and never swing it really more than half a point in any 1 hour as well. So if you do find that you're at the higher end, you need to bring it down, do it over a few hours. You can just drip some RO in, or even better, use an RO top-up unit and give yourself really good control. Also, in terms of stability on salinity, it's important you know what your salinity actually is by a proper refractometer or a digital means of testing it. In store we use the D&D refractometers. We found them to be extremely reliable. They hold the calibration better than a lot of other brands as well. Even so, make sure you calibrate it using seawater, not RO, at least once every few months or any time that you bump it. The next most important parameters are nitrate and phosphate. Phosphate wants to be kept very low, levels below 0.1 ppm at absolutely all times, and preferably nearer to about 0.05, something like that. Nitrates again want to be very low and they want to be stable. For most systems, 1 to 2 ppm of nitrate is the sweet spot. If you're keeping stuff which is more sensitive, then you might be wanting to look at a low nutrient system running at around 1 ppm, or even an ultra low nutrient system running near 0 ppm. It's also very important that you keep your KH and magnesium and calcium very stable. In the vast majority of tanks you don't need to dose to do this. This can be done with water changes. It's only if you've got a hard coral tank that's very heavy on hard corals, or especially if you have a lot of SBS, which can have quite a lot of draw-on elements. In those cases you may want to look at dosing, but dosing really is a last resort and not something you should do proactively. It should only ever be done to bring levels up to where they should be, and also you should always match your levels to which brand of salt you're using. Also, in terms of stability, I'd say always make sure you use the same brand of salt if you can. It's better generally to use a synthetic salt rather than evap salt because you'll get more consistent levels. And when you're mixing the salt, don't mix batches smaller than 200 litres, and preferably mix batches in a size where you can use the entire bucket of salt, because that way if you get any settlement of the crystals within the bucket, that will even out more effectively. Always also make sure that you roll the bucket of salt across the floor a couple of times backwards and forwards to mix the salt well, especially on an evap salt, and especially if you're only mixing part buckets at a time. Okay, so the next pro tip is to only buy what's needed. You find that a lot of the times we see a lot of tanks where people have got a lot of equipment that they don't really understand and they don't really need. You can spend a huge amount of money on things such as UV, ozone, reactors and small skimmers without any real understanding of why you need them or if it's going to improve your tank. In some cases, actually running a reactor with the incorrect media in it for your system can actually do more harm than good. Small skimmers can also actually do more harm than good as well. especially if they're a cheaper brand and work less efficiently. They can generally just suck out a lot of your plankton, which your corals would be eating, and not very effectively target the oils and the proteins that you actually want to remove. So think carefully before you buy a piece of equipment, and always think, do I really need this or not? Often the money is better spent on a smaller amount of equipment, but a much higher quality, where you're going to get better results from it and you're going to get better reliability. So before you buy any piece of equipment, think, is that the best use of money for improving my tank? Because often using it for extra sulfur water changes or improving your cleanup proof will often bring far better results in the long term than buying yet another reactor. Okay, so number 5 pro tip is to do with feeding your fish. So most people feed their fish at least twice a day. That is the absolute minimum that you can get away with. If you want your fish to really grow and keep that water clarity and quality really good, best way of doing that is by spreading the feeds out into as many small feeds as you can. We typically do 8 to 9 feeds a day in the shop here, and we feed our systems pretty heavily, and anyone that's popped in will see our water clarity is usually pretty sharp and our water quality is pretty good. You're going to get much better growth on the fish that way and much better coloration as well. Bear in mind, most reef fish in the wild will be feeding more or less continuously, and a lot of fish can't store food for very long, so although they might eat quite a lot of food in one go, an hour or two later they've processed that food and they're already starving and burning those fat reserves. So the key with feeding is not so much how much you feed, but how long the time is between each feed that the fish has to go, during which time it's losing body weight. So to get the best results, you want to feed as much as you can, as often as you can, to get as much food into the tank with it all being consumed by the fish. If you're there all night in the evening, you can spread the feeding out into 2 or 3 feeds, and if you're there all day on the weekend, spread it out even more. You'll see a massive increase in the coloration and the growth rates on the fish, and generally by breaking up into lots of smaller feeds, you should see an improvement in water clarity and improvement in water conditions as well. Makes a huge difference, and it's just one of those things where a little bit extra love and care and attention can really bring you a lot of benefits. Also make sure you feed a wide variety of foods as possible. A little bit of flakes is especially good on grazing species. We use Ocean Nutrition's Formula 2 flake, which is fantastic for tangs and angels and things. If you are feeding that, make it the first feed of the day and the first feed of your evening feeds. That's when the fish are at their hungriest and they're most likely to pack themselves out on flake, which will give them a huge amount of vitamins and minerals, and will also ensure that they get a diet that isn't too protein rich. Then you can follow it up with the frozen, and they'll eat that a little bit in moderation. It's the best way of doing it, it's the easiest way to wean stuff onto flake, and it's best for long-term health of tangs, which can suffer with kidney and liver complaints if they're fed a too protein-rich, heavy diet. In terms of feeding frozen, always keep your frozen packets in the fridge arranged in order, pick from the front and pass to the back. That way you can ensure you don't get one that's left at the back of the freezer and goes out of date before it's used, which can be quite problematical, and also ensures the fish get a nice rotation of all the foods that you have on offer without you having to remember what you fed last time. We recommend on a frozen diet for the majority of fish to primarily base it around a mysis base. If you've got small fish, then also feed things like cyclops as well, which can be a great food, things like chromis and mandarins. For larger fish, look at things like krill and squid, and if you can get big fish onto lancefish or squid, then you'll get fantastic growth rates. You can also feed pellet, but keep that in moderation. It will give you really good growth, but it can also make a lot of mess of water quality, as can some of the very fine foods, such as red planktons and microplanktons, which can be quite messy, and some of the larger foods, particularly mussels and cockles, can also be quite messy. Ensure also that you are feeding aquarium foods and they are packaged as aquarium products. Although you can buy mussels and shrimps cheaper from the supermarket, they haven't been sterilised, and there is a risk that you can bring infection into your tank in that way. Also, some shrimps and fish are treated with peroxides and bleached when selling in supermarkets, to help keep them fresh for longer, and those peroxides can cause issues to shrimps in the tank and some other more sensitive items such as chalice corals. So our sixth pro tip again is about putting some love and care and attention into your tank, and with this we're going to look at target feeding corals. Now, target feeding corals we normally recommend to do at least once a week, but if you really want to get some excellent growth on those corals, then you can feed them every day. Avoid using things like pellets too much, which can on some corals be difficult to digest and cause them to vomit them back out and cause all sorts of issues. Pellets are a great food for things like acans and scollies, but you do need to feed them in moderation. We generally use for target feeding a wide variety of frozen foods and mix it up with a little bit of amino acids and liquid coral foods as well. We do a huge range of liquid coral foods in store that we manufacture ourselves, and also we do amino acids. You can vary that out with a little bit of frozen things as well. Just defrost some into a jug of tank water, mix in your aminos and your liquid food, load it all up in the turkey baster and go around of an evening when the tank is under blue lights and just squirt it onto everything when the polyps are open. If you're having trouble getting the polyps to open, then pre-feed with an amino acid about 20 minutes before you do the main feed. This will help them digest the carbohydrates in the food and also make sure that they open their polyps up to a much larger degree, so they'll capture much more of the food, which means the corals get more food and there's less food lying around to damage your water quality. The more often you target feed, the better the growth will be. You can target feed 2 or 3 times a day if you want to. If you do it too heavily with foods that are too messy, it may cause some water quality issues, but they can easily be resolved with water changes and a bit of media use. The benefits to your corals in doing this way mean sure you might spend a few extra pounds or dollars on maintaining your aquarium, but the growth rate may reach many hundreds of pounds or dollars a year in extra coral growth. Okay, seventh pro tip, and I would say arguably the most important one, is water change, water change, water change. The more water changes you do, the better your tank will look. It's as simple as that. As long as you've kept your levels reasonably stable, the new water should be coming at the same kind of levels as you already have, and you can water change tanks out quite heavily. We often do water changes of 50%, 70%, 80% on some of our systems. You don't really get any ill effects from it as long as you match the salinity and your temperature is reasonably similar. As long as you don't drop the temperature in the tank below 24 degrees when doing your water change, I wouldn't worry too much about warming it up or anything. Although we say the temperature is important to be stable, a little swing while you do a water change for a few minutes or a couple of hours while the heat is catch up isn't really going to do too much harm. We recommend as an absolute minimum you should be changing 10% of your water once a week, and once a month you should be doing a larger 20% change. Once every 6 months or so do a much bigger change and do a 50%. You will see the benefits within a few hours. Okay, so pro tip number 8 is to always ask questions. No matter how stupid the question you think it is, it's always better to ask. The only stupid question really, as they say, is the one that isn't asked. You'd be amazed how often that something that you expect you know the answer to, the answer could actually be quite different to what you expected. And maybe 9 times out of 10 you get the answer back that you did expect, but that 1 time in 10 you don't. Sometimes that can be quite critical to your tank. So if you're in any doubt over anything, just ask someone and just double check that what you're doing is the right thing to do. Which leads us also into point 9. So our 9th pro tip is always check the reliability of the source for your information. If you're using a reputable website, I'd say something like www.fishbase.org, the information on there is scientifically based and peer reviewed. You can be pretty sure that the information is going to be correct, or at least as close to correct as you're likely to get from anywhere. Some other sources, like good aquatic shops like Live Aquaria, will also put out pretty good information. You'll sometimes find that the odd thing might be a little bit out, but it's going to be a fairly reliable source. The least reliable sources are probably things like online forums and Facebook groups, where often people are quite happy to voice an opinion about a species or something like that, having never kept it themselves or never had any success with it. So be very wary if you hear advice from a Facebook group about a species being particularly easy to keep or particularly difficult to keep. It's often worth checking to see if the person who's answering the question has kept that species and how long they had it for as well. Also, if someone is giving you advice on how to keep your tank parameters a certain way or on a piece of equipment, just have a little look at what their tank looks like. If they've got a fully thriving, healthy system, then you can be pretty sure that the bulk of their advice is going to be pretty good. If their tank is an algae-filled mess with a couple of fish with disease in them and some corals that are suffering, then maybe it may not be such a good idea to follow their advice. Also, when you're on a forum, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the majority view. You could have 10 people comment. Say you ask advice on a certain fish, you get 10 people comment, 9 people give you basically the same answer, and someone else gives you an answer that's different. You might find that the person that gives you the answer that's different might be the only one that's actually kept that species, and the other 9 are just quoting things that they've heard or quoting from books. Practical experience with the species concerned goes a long way, and the same comes to it when you go to shops, to visit shops as well. Have a look at the quality of their livestock and their corals. Are their corals doing really well? Are their tanks clean? Are their fish disease free? If they are, then you can be fairly certain their level of advice is going to be pretty good. If they're not, then you should maybe take their advice with a little bit of pinch of salt and choose a more reputable source for checking some of the facts that are in it. There are some really good shops out there, and it's sometimes worth a little bit of a travel to get to some good ones, rather than just going to whichever one is nearest. Often you're better off with a specialist marine store as well, rather than a shop that's primarily tropical based and maybe does a bit of goldfish and a bit of reptiles as well, rather than one that's just focused on marines. Generally, if that's their specialty, you're going to get a little bit better advice. Okay, so our 10th pro tip, and again a really important one, is quarantine. And this applies to the fish, but it can also apply to corals and things as well. One of the best ways of getting a really good reef tank is longevity. You want those corals to spend a long time growing, to get really good size, and to all grow together so it has like a finished, grown-in look. And to do that takes time. And you're not going to get that look if every 6 months, 12 months you're going to have to rip the whole tank apart and get all your fish out and quarantine them because you put a disease in the tank yet again. So when you're buying fish, always ask to see the quarantine facilities in your store. Some places will tell you that the wholesaler quarantines for them, but quarantine is something that really should be done at every step in the chain. There are actually very few wholesalers that quarantine, and no major wholesalers in the UK quarantine at all at this time. So the bulk of the livestock that you will be getting, if it's coming into a shop, won't have been quarantined when it's arrived there. If the shop has a separate quarantine facility, that is something that takes a lot of time and money to set up and to run. And if you ask them, they're going to be pretty proud of their quarantine system. They'll happily show you where it is. And if they can't, if it's in back a house where customers aren't allowed to go or whatever, just hand them your phone and they'll walk out there and video it for you to show you. Shops that have put all the time and expense into making a quarantine system, where the fish are kept in separate water in the main displays, are going to be pretty proud to show that off and show that the efforts they've gone to make sure that you get the healthiest and best conditioned fish. If all the fish are onto one system and new stuff is coming in and things like that, you're almost definitely going to get a disease at some point, particularly if the shop is also accepting trading fish from customers and things as well. If you want to query it a little bit further, what you can do is just go into your local shop, if there's a new shop you haven't been into before, and just explain to them and just say, I've got a fish at home that's very sick, can I bring it in? And if they say, yeah, we've got a separate quarantine tank and everything to treat it, then you know that their quarantine systems are pretty good. If they're happy to just take it in and put it straight into the main system, or they say that they can't take it in because they don't have a quarantine facility, then just be very wary about buying any fish from there, because you're going to get the same problem. You can quarantine fish at home, but it's very difficult to do. Some species are easier than others, but if you are going to set up a home quarantine tank, it needs to be a good water volume to make it easy to dose the meds at the right levels. You want a quarantine tank that's at least 200 litres in size, and you want expert advice from someone who quarantines on a regular basis as to the best way of doing it before you attempt to do it. The dosage of the meds is quite critical, and there's a lot of factors involved. It's not just a case of reading the instructions on the bottle. If you dose the meds too high, you can kill all the fish with the meds. If you dose too low, to be on the safe side, you can introduce a disease through that fish into your main display and cause yourself a lot of time, expense and trouble. Bear in mind, if the shop doesn't quarantine, then there's also possible cross-contamination of parasites into their coral and invert bays as well. Or if they're taking corals in as trade-ins from random walk-ins, then again those could come in carrying spores, rarely for velvet or white spot or flukes, but quite often for Bruckinella, which is very easily transmitted on corals. Bruckinella is often called clownfish disease, but it can affect a wide variety of species, and some strains can be extremely deadly, often wiping out all the fish in an aquarium within 24 hours. So that's something you need to take very seriously. Best option is to buy corals from somewhere that doesn't sell fish, or somewhere where all their fish is quarantined. If it is a shop that's selling unquarantined fish and selling corals, then you need to quarantine the corals yourself. To do this, you need 2 quarantine systems, and what you do is you put all of the corals into one tank and you leave them there for 3 months. And while you're filling that tank up, after 3 months you then switch and start filling up tank number 2 with corals. At the end of the 6th month period, everything in tank 1, which has had no new additions for 3 months, can then go into the main aquarium, and then you can then start refilling quarantine 1 with new corals, and quarantine 2, which has had no new additions, then for 3 months that can then be go across. This enables you to buy corals every week if you wish to, and make sure they're all quarantined before they go into the tank. Obviously this means running 2 separate reef quarantine systems in addition to a fish quarantine system, so it is quite expensive to do, but it will save you a lot of headaches in the long run if you're buying from quite a dirty source. It's well worth having a look around. There's a huge variance in quality as to where you buy a livestock. Obviously we do our best in store to keep ours as good as we can, and we like to think that we're at the forefront of it. There are a few other good shops around the country that also keep them to the same kind of standard that we do. Also be exceptionally careful if you're buying anything from tank breakdowns or Facebook groups. Disease is a common reason for why people quit the hobby, and if you're buying something from a tank that has disease infection, it's very easy to introduce a major problem into your aquarium. Also, if people are breaking down the tank, often it's been neglected for a long period of time, and you can also bring in lots of other pests that may have slipped through the net because they haven't been watching their tanks, such as Aptasia, bubble algae, flatworms, and a huge variety of other problems. If you're buying anything from a tank breakdown, then you should always put it through quarantine yourself. In the case of corals, a minimum of 12 weeks fallow with no new additions. And with fish, I would be very on the cautious side and do 5 to 10 days on meds, and then possibly another 28 days observation period after that. The main fish in your tank and your corals is a substantial investment in time and money, and they're your pets and very much loved part of the family, and it's not worth jeopardising all of those just to get a fish a little bit sooner or £10 cheaper. Now, some of these 10 tips that we've put into this video you'll be doing already, and if you're really good, or maybe you've been doing this for a long time, you might be doing all of them, but chances are most of you are only doing 1 or 2 of these. So it's well worth trying to do as many of these as you can, and over the next few months try and implement a policy where you cover all of these 10 tips and you do them all of the time. If you do this, you'll see a dramatic improvement in your tank in the short term, and you'll see a much more successful tank in the long term. Getting a reef tank to year 1 is relatively easy. Getting it to year 2 or year 5 or year 10 takes a lot more work. And to get that fully grown in look and those really big show fish, that's the effort you need to go to. So make sure that you do all of these tips, and that will help you well on your way to having a very successful long-term tank. We bring out a wide variety of videos and things from Salty Revolution here, where we try and advise you and help you with your tank. So check out our YouTube channel by searching Salty Revolution on YouTube. You can also check out our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/saltyrevolution. And you can also follow me on Instagram. If you just type James Child into Instagram, I should just pop up. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you in next week's how-to, where I'll be covering another important topic.